Hi guys, welcome to the episode. On today's show, I've got Rachel Balkovec. Rachel is a research and development fellow at Driveline Baseball in Seattle and has worked in professional baseball for 7 years as a strength and conditioning coach, including roles at the Houston Astros, the St. Louis Cardinals, and the Chicago Whitesox. I had a fascinating conversation with Rachel where she discusses her research on gaze tracking in baseball, as well as lower limb biomechanics. And we also get into her passion for organisational development and plans to become a GM of a professional baseball team. I hope you enjoy listening to this episode, but please support the show and subscribe, and check out the show notes if there's anything you want to refer to at informperformance.com. Just want to say a big thank you to Tim Tam, a brand that makes vibration or percussion-based recovery products, who have really kindly sponsored the launch of this podcast. They are responsible for the power massager and more recently the pulse massager, and both are great examples of tools that you can use for soft tissue recovery, especially when you're on the road. If you would like to get your hands on a free power massager, then we're actually running a competition with Tim Tam. All you have to do is subscribe to this podcast on iTunes and follow us on Instagram at Inform Performance. Send us a screenshot that you've subscribed to the DMs of the Inform Performance Instagram page. Then in a few weeks, we'll pick a subscriber at random to win the Tim Tam massager. And in the meantime, check out Tim Tam's Instagram page at Tim Tam Recovery. Hi, Rachel. Thank you for giving up the time and coming on the show today.
Yeah, thanks for being so flexible and getting me on here.
No problem. And just for the listeners, could you give us a bit of an intro into your education, your background, and kind of how you got to where you are today?
Well, it's a little bit of a long story, but I'll try to just shorten it up. I did my undergraduate degree, grew up in Omaha, Nebraska. That's the middle of the country for anyone listening internationally. And then I did my undergraduate degree mostly at the University of New Mexico, where I played college softball. And then after that, I went and did an internship with Athletes Performance, better known as EXOS. And then I did my graduate assistantship with LSU, which is a pretty, again, for just people who may not know, pretty notable collegiate athletics there at LSU. So that was an excellent experience to be in a really elite level culture where they were just extremely successful in a lot of different sports, and the expectations are really high there. And then left there and did a string of internships surrounding professional baseball, but with the Chicago Whitesox, the St. Louis Cardinals. I went and did a small internship in the Dominican Republic, and then another long story short, was hired full-time by the St. Louis Cardinals to be their minor league strength and conditioning coordinator, which for those of you who don't know, that just means like the minor league system for professional baseball is extremely extensive. So I was overseeing 10 strength coaches, about 250 athletes, and everything that surrounds strength and conditioning, nutrition, all those things. And then 3 seasons after that, I was with the Houston Astros as a Latin American coordinator for them, and also as the AA strength coach for them. And then this past year, I quit with the Houston Astros and moved to Europe, of all places, and went to Amsterdam for a degree in human movement sciences, just MSc in human movement sciences. So that degree is a research degree, and it, this is something you guys are probably more familiar with for your crowd, is that it's a year of classes and then a year of research, or a research project you're supposed to complete. So I did a year of classes in Amsterdam, and now I'm at Driveline Baseball in Seattle doing my research assignment, mostly in gaze tracking for hitters and also in pitching biomechanics.
What specifically are you looking into with that research?
So for twofold. So for the pitching biomechanics, is basically looking at the effects of different loading strategies. So basically the way that a pitcher loads will determine, theoretically, the hypothesis is that it will determine the timing of the pelvis and the thorax, and then also the different kinetics for shoulder and elbow. So the hypothesis is that the more hip dominant and or posterior dominant strategy, however you want to name it, will yield better timing for the pelvis and thorax, and then in turn will then take stress off of the shoulder and the elbow. So we're going to examine their foot pressure on the body track mat, basically, and also their like with 3D motion capture, all of their different kinematics and kinetics, and try to like understand what different hip loading strategies do up the chain, basically, as a pitcher throws a baseball. And then from the hitting side of things, or the hitting project I'm working on, is gaze tracking. So that's a little bit more out there. Pitching biomechanics has been studied for a really long time. So hitting, the gaze tracking has not. So it's definitely, there's been some work done by a guy named Dr. Mann and Dr. Peter Fatty, and also Dr. Moeller in Australia, and Dr. Fatty's in Illinois. But they've done some work surrounding this, like a lot in cricket, of all things, and then a little bit in baseball, but it just is a really unexplored area. So basically, gaze tracking is literally just tracking exactly where your pupils are looking. So in the sport of baseball, it's really important to track a ball, obviously. But what is funny is that like there's an old adage in baseball, it's keep your eye on the ball. And the truth of the matter is that you actually don't keep your eyes on the ball at all sometimes. So tracking gaze strategies is not only difficult to do, but it's really interesting because something that we've thought has happened in the sport for a really long time is actually not happening. So basically the gaze tracking study that we're going to be doing here at Driveline is really, really out there, because most of the research that's been done, in fact, all of it has been done on pitching machines, and even in cricket, it's been done on bowling machines that are just like you put a ball in a machine and it spits it out. And then the hitters and the batters in cricket try to hit it, right? But what we do know from the research about gaze tracking is that actually the most important cues and the most important information that a batter is getting is coming from the pitcher's movement. So actually the research doesn't make a whole lot of sense, because they've cut out the pitcher and they're just using ball flight. They're just using a machine. They put the ball in the machine and then it pops out and goes wherever it goes. So they've completely cut out a really important, and I would even say like 80% of the important attentional cueing is coming from the pitcher, or in cricket, the bowler. And so to cut that out when we're doing research is actually like, it almost, I don't want to say it negates the research, because we've learned some really interesting things over the past 10 to 20 years that this has been studied. But what we're trying to do at Driveline is the study that hasn't been done yet, which is live pitching. So we are actually taking gaze tracking technology. So we use a company called Pupil Labs, which is, I think, one of the best out there. There's not a whole lot of companies, but there's a few. And Pupil Labs is supposed to be the best. So we selected their technology, and we're kind of manually doing this calibration with a live pitcher and trying to sort through the data and make sure what we're doing is actually like collecting useful information. So at the moment, we're just kind of doing a pilot study for this. If you can't tell, I'm really excited about this. I skipped over the pitching biomechanics a little bit, and I'm really like investing a lot of time in learning more about the gaze tracking and spending some time on that study, because it hasn't been done yet ever. Yeah. So it's really fun to work on a project that's that challenging, and we don't even know if it's going to work out, but we're going to try. And there's, definitely some like promising results from what we've seen so far as like our ability to do the study. So
I guess as well, the body of literature on pitching biomechanics is quite vast compared to looking at visual tracking.
It is, but the reason why I chose the study with pitching biomechanics and the hip loading strategy is because that actually has never been studied, which is mind-blowing, but also at the same time, a lot of the research that's been done thus far in pitching biomechanics is put out there by orthopedic surgeons. And so they're looking at the joint that's injured, right? But like from my perspective as a strength and conditioning professional for the past 10 years, and just something I've been fascinated with due to my own injuries and the mentorship that I've received, is like everything starts, from the ground up and from the hips. And so there's been, of all the research, and I've got like, me personally, I have 120 articles on my hard drive. So I know there's got to be close to 200 out there of like pitching biomechanics. 90% of the articles that I have are on like the shoulder and the elbow. And then I would say 10% are on like the pelvis and the trunk. And there's like one or two that have even like covered the lower half, the legs, what's going on in the lower half. And in my opinion, that's probably the most important part. And we're just cutting it out. We've done all this research on, the shoulder and the elbow, but not on what's happening in the lower half at the beginning stages of the pitch to cause stress on the shoulder and elbow. So for as much research as has been done, like, believe it or not, this research study will probably be the first of its kind or the first 5 of its kind. So both kind of groundbreaking in their own ways, which is fun. Like, this is the type of research that I want to do. I don't want to do something that's already been done before.
And I guess with the biomechanics and the pitching, you're looking more at potentially the root of the problem that you get at the elbow and the shoulder, rather than going straight to the source of pain or problem.
Exactly. Yeah.
And when just to kind of bounce back to the visual tracking, you're obviously monitoring where the visual gaze is going. What kind of outcomes are you looking at? Are you looking at how they then strike the ball?
Yeah. So, okay. So we don't know yet. The problem with doing where they're striking the ball is it gets really complicated with, okay, you could say even like exit velocity of the ball to measure how well they're hitting it based off of their gaze strategy. But the way that they, like, the exit velocity of the ball and the ball metrics and how well they do is really dependent on where the pitch was, where they were standing on the plate, there's like so many mental factors that go into it. So what we're thinking of doing, what we're hoping to do is actually like get players who have had metrics that are successful in this particular area over a long period of time. And so previous studies, and I'm sure you're familiar with like the expert versus novice model. The expert versus novice model happens in a lot of research. And so they get somebody who's really good in the sport and somebody who's like a high school athlete in the sport, and they compare their strategies in all kinds of things. And so the expert and novice research that's been available so far on gaze tracking is saying like, oh, they use major league players, major league baseball players, or like AAA, so high level minor league players versus high school players. And they find a little bit of difference, but for me, I would even want to dig a little bit deeper. And it's not just major league players, because there's actually some major league baseball players that still don't hit the ball that well, relatively speaking. So I basically am going to go after like the 1% of the 1% and try to get the guys who actually have great swing decision metrics. And so we're talking about guys who are like literally the best at selecting the correct pitches to hit. Not just like, oh, they're good baseball players, but like they're really good in this particular area. So all that to say, going back to your original question, are we going to measure the outcomes? Well, we're actually going to find guys who already have the outcomes we're looking for, like, and have been tested over a long period of time. So I'm like, we're going to go after some big name players who have proven themselves in these particular areas over a long period of time in professional baseball and recruit them to the study, and then study their gaze tracking and like deem that as elite level strategies.
Yeah.
So we're kind of doing what you said backwards. We're not going to just test everyone and see who has the best batted ball metrics. We're going to go after people who've proven themselves at the highest level and see what they're doing.
And when are you kind of expecting to finish the research, or when can people expect to perhaps see this research or the outcomes of it?
Oh, I don't know. I would say like we're delving into like the pilot study right now and really just getting used to the technology and what kind of things we're going to run into. But realistically, like the professional baseball season is still going on, and it will be for another month. And also after a 10-month long ride, those guys aren't going to want to come right away to the facility. So realistically, we're trying to look at like later in the off season, which would be January, February, to even do this study. And then by the time it's published and everything, I mean, we're talking about a year from now, like hopefully. So that's like that's the fun of the research process, kind of, is when and if we actually get to publish a study like this. It's like we all know the work and the like extensive, I mean, I guess I wouldn't even say extensive, but tedious work that goes into it for a long period of time before you actually see a research paper published. And then it just gives you a really good idea also of like when research is published, people have already known about this for a long time, and research tends to be behind a little bit. So as far as the time frame, I would say hoping a year from now, maybe.
And are you still involved in strength conditioning and coaching on a day-to-day basis?
No. and I feel good about that. So basically the transition, I spent the last 10 years as a strength coach, and then I basically made a decision at the end of 2018 season with the Houston Astros that I just, I was going to start a transition out of strength and conditioning and more into administration and or, just player evaluation, with the hopes of becoming a general manager someday. And so you're basically interviewing me at like the first step of, I would call this maybe the second step of that process, which the first step was going back to school for a degree in research, a degree in biomechanics. Like that, there's a heavy math and physics and statistics focus with my classes. And that may sound kind of weird. You're like, why, you're going to go be a business person or a GM, and you want that background, but actually in professional baseball, and I think in a lot of sports these days, like knowing the numbers and understanding how to code and do all those things is really important for your development into a general manager. And I just didn't want to skip steps. So I took that step out of strength and conditioning, went back to school. The degree is in research, and that just means it's a lot of math and coding and stuff. And so now I'm at Driveline doing the research. I'll be back in professional baseball next year with a team, likely not in strength and conditioning. So it's still a passion of mine. Ultimately, my degree is human movement sciences or biomechanics. But I'm going to be just applying that lens, applying that perspective of how the body moves to player evaluation and like other areas of sports. So that was a super long answer to say no. I no longer am trying to be a strength coach, even though I'm not, if the right opportunity came open, I don't think I would shut it out completely. But I also have other aspirations as far as like being in different leadership roles within an organization.
And I guess it's not, given your background as a coordinator, which is perhaps a bit more managerial anyway, I guess that's not too shocking that you're heading that way, because you've had that experience quite early on at actually managing and coordinating members of staff, rather than being I guess like a purebred in the gym strength coach only. Not to say that's just what they do, but you've had that kind of slightly different role with people.
Yeah, I mean that's always been a passion of mine, and so by the time when I was 26, I was hired to be the coordinator for the Cardinals. And that was, like looking back, there's no way I was ready for that role. But at the same time, like leadership has always been a passion of mine. And I would say like a strength or a calling even of mine. And just like, it's been kind of that way since I was young. Like I've always been the team captain, the leader, the hard worker, the person that's going to say something that needs to be said, like from a really young age, and so that's always just been I would call it a calling, to be honest with you, not a passion, but not something I read about and take notes about. And I do that too, actually. Like I do really pay attention to those things and read the leadership books and all that. But it started way before I was a manager for the Cardinals. So I just realized basically like being a strength and conditioning coach within a sports organization, you can only exercise those leadership muscles so far, and then you're always going to be at the mercy of, just hoping that the pitching coaches, the hitting coaches, the managers, the front office all share your leadership vision. And if they don't, you're a strength coach. And so you're going to be, you're not going to be making those decisions. And when I say those decisions, I mean like how we interact with the players and like what the discipline structure looks like, what the reward structure looks like, how are we empowering them, all of these things, who are we hiring, all those decisions, you don't get to make those as a strength coach. You do within your own department. And so that kind of fed me for a while. Like personally, I was fulfilled for a while to be in a managerial role for, I guess, 5 of my 7 seasons in professional baseball, because within a department, that's excellent practice. But I want something bigger. I want a bigger challenge. I want more responsibility. And so if I want to do that, then I got to move out of strength and conditioning and kind of pivot to a different role.
And it sounds like you're going to be very well equipped to go into that role, because you can appreciate the athleticism and how you develop and manage the physical attributes of an athlete. The statistics. I guess baseball is a hell of a statistical and technical sport. You can look at that through the research in biomechanics that you're doing. And obviously your passion, or not passion, but your calling is leadership. Is there anything you think you need to personally work on between now and perhaps being a GM? Is there any areas where you feel like you're weaker or need to focus on? Sorry, that's a beast of a question.
Yeah, so many areas. Like, I mean, it's like I'm at the bottom of the mountain, and like I said, this is step number 2, so I have a lot to learn. But to your point, and something I think is going to help me in the long run, is that I did spend so long, understanding how the body moves and how one guy can be so successful, and the same body type can be such a failure, so I think that when I do get that opportunity, that I'll have a very, very unique lens to look through. So I definitely don't regret spending so much time in the strength and conditioning realm. And I've also had excellent mentors in the hitting and pitching realms as well, which is going to help me, and I think even possibly turn into a job opportunity. And so I'm grateful for those, learning experiences, because I think a lot of general managers in every sport these days, they're not familiar with the on-field, physical body. They just aren't. They're really good at numbers. They might be a great business person, but they don't know how to evaluate what's going on from a physical standpoint. And so that could be a shortcoming of today's general manager. Whereas I think I'm going to, in the long run, I took the long way around, but in the long run, it's going to help me. What do I have to learn? God, I don't know. So much. I don't know, I don't know where to start. I definitely am going to have to be in scouting and player evaluation, and just understanding, I think, the rules, just of when, what, how, all of it, and I have a lot more to learn in the statistics area, and also coding and being able to take a data set and really dive in and understand what the numbers mean. I definitely have a better understanding of that now than I did a year ago, but I have a lot more work to do in a practical setting and not just in a classroom. So yeah, there's tons of that. And then also from the leadership standpoint, I'm not ready to take over an organization today. So I can't, the next move that I make, the next job that I take, I'm not necessarily looking for the winningest organization or the best, organization out there, from a winning standpoint, from what the fans see. I'm really diving into who's running that organization and who can mentor me from a leadership standpoint further down my path. And I think that's an important note, if anyone out there is listening, strength coach or not, or whatever, it's when you're taking a job, you have to really take a deep dive into who's running the organization. Because you're not, wins matter, and it's fun to be a part of a winning organization in some ways, but also you want to be around people who can really mentor you in what you want to do. And so I'm for example, there's an organization that's contacted me about a job, and I'm going down the list of their executives and just Googling the heck out of them, looking at their social media profiles, listening to their podcasts, listening to what they say over and over and over again, so I can get a better understanding of their personal values and not just what their wins and loss record is, because that could be really bad, and they could be in a rebuild phase, or it could be really good and they could be horrible people, who knows what's going on behind the scenes. So you have to be able to really do your research and read between the lines to see what kind of leadership is currently running an organization.
I think it's interesting as well, because I think a lot of people trying to get into the industry, whether that's, I guess, skills analysis, skills coach, strength and conditioning, whatever kind of part of wider sports performance and medicine you're going into, I think there's always this perception that if you go to the sooner you get to the best team, the more you'll develop. But I think probably the opposite's true, isn't it? And actually, you don't want to go to the best team. You want to go to a team that maybe there's some lower hanging fruit and there's more work you can do, and there's more perhaps trust that can be placed on you to do some of the work itself, rather than going in at that finished product where basically you don't want to screw up.
Oh yeah. There's value to both. But to your point, like you definitely see a lot of people who are fans. They want to work for the biggest name team because it's the biggest name team, so they can wear the logo and put it on their Twitter account. And it's like sometimes those things go hand in hand. Like LSU, the LSU Tigers, the college I mentioned that I was at, that's a really good name to have on your resume, but also I learned so much there, and they gave me a lot of responsibility. I got my hands dirty. I wasn't just off to the side doing nothing. I was a part of it, and I was fortunate that those two did go hand in hand for me. I developed a lot there. But sometimes, to your point, yeah, it's a finished product, and they kind of already have their ways. And it also depends on where you're at in your career. It was good for me to go into a finished product when I was 22. Because, like, I didn't know what I was doing, so I need to go into a finished product where I could see how well it was run. And also they gave me some responsibility and told me, hey, this is how you should run it. And I did, and I was happy for that guidance. Nowadays, I'm 32, I'm 10 years into my career. And as I said, leadership is a calling of mine. Organizational development is a calling of mine. I'm fascinated by culture change. I'm fascinated by quick culture change. When you see that team go from a losing team to a championship, like what happened in 1 year, I'm fascinated by those things. And I don't necessarily want a finished product going into it. I want something that's a little bit of a mess that I might be able to contribute a little bit more to. So it just depends on where you're at in your career. But yeah, always selecting the biggest logo is probably a wrong choice if that's your motivation. Now, I have some big logos on my resume, so I'm not dogging people, but I definitely can tell you, like, I'm not a sports fan. I'm not a baseball fan. I'm not any kind of fan of sports. So I didn't make those choices just to get a logo on my resume for sure.
You can probably also talk to athletes more on, a human level, rather than being starstruck as well when you're not as, fanatical about who they are.
I definitely have some funny stories of, like, not knowing who extremely famous players were. And I like it. Like, sometimes it's embarrassing. Like, I'll be like, who's that? And they're like, what? Like, this guy's been playing for 10 years. But I like it. Like, I would rather, like you said, I would rather go in with a clean slate speaking to a professional athlete than go in and be like, oh, I've been watching this guy for 10 years, and I can't talk to him because I'm a fan of him. Like, I'm not a fan of anyone. The only people I'm a fan of are people who I have worked one-on-one directly with, and I know that they work hard, that they are, I don't want to say a good person, but just that they're in tune, they're aware. And, like, those are the people I root for. I don't root for someone just because I grew up watching him on TV. Like, I'm just not a fan. I feel blessed and fortunate that I didn't grow up, with that kind of starstruck fan mentality. And it's not even a knock on people who did, because that's normal. But I just grew up in a household where we didn't idolize sports people. We really didn't. The sports were on, they were around, but we did not idolize them by any means.
How do you find the actual athletes, especially the high-profile athletes, how do you find they respond when, I don't know, you go up to them and you introduce yourself and you ask them what their name is, something they're probably rarely used to?
Oh, good. That's a great question. Sometimes I even will know who it is, but I still ask their name. Like, that's weird. I think it's weird when people are like, hey, I'm Rachel, and then they shake your hand, they don't say their name. I think that's weird. Like, you shouldn't assume. I don't care how famous you are or how long you've been, whatever. Like, just introduce yourself. It's like create a human connection immediately. Don't create a superiority. And so I always am like, I introduce myself. I don't expect that anyone thinks I know them. I don't know. Maybe I've never had any, like, adverse reactions immediately, but I'm sure they might have been like, oh, that girl doesn't know who I am, and I don't care. Like,
have you ever read Legacy by James Kerr?
I have.
Because I think there's a good kind of tangent point in his book that relates to this, where he talks about good people make good All Blacks, and the sweeping the shed concept, and you're never bigger than the organisation or your current position in that team.
Oh, I like, when I read that book, I was like, I don't know who, like, who I do know who, like, started the culture with the All Blacks. Like, you can read it in the book, but it's like, man, that guy was speaking straight from my soul and my playbook. Like,
it's a great leadership book as well, isn't it?
Yeah, I've used some things in that book. For example, like the peer council and stuff, with some of the players I've worked with, and it's really great. Yeah, I love that book. Definitely on my nightstand.
Besides Legacy, is there kind of any books or places you personally go to learn about organizational behavior, development, and leadership?
There's a couple of books that stick out. One of them is The Score Takes Care of Itself. It's by Bill Walsh. Bill Walsh was a famous football coach in the United States and American football, not soccer. He was a football coach, and he basically took a team who was a losing team and within 2 years won back-to-back Super Bowls. And so he talks about like rapid culture change, and man, that book I couldn't put it down. It's a long book. It's thick, but I could not put it down. And I've read it several times now, and it's like, it's a textbook for me. It's a story, and it's written by that coach, his son, and one of his players. So it's like 3 authors, really, really interesting, like, perspective on a book. But yeah, it's like a textbook. It's not even a story anymore for me. And then also there's a book called The Man Watching, and that's by, I'm trying to think of the author's name. The book is written about Anson Dorrance, and Anson Dorrance is a soccer coach in the United States. He has worked for UNC or University of North Carolina for, I think 40 years now. And he's won 25 national championships out of the 40 years that he's been there. Maybe that's not even, I think it's like 25 out of the 30 years that he's been there. And also, like, he's made an impact on women's soccer, period. I mean, if you want to know, like, women's soccer in the United States has gotten a lot of press really lately, because of the World Cup, and also like the 1999 team, like they got a lot of press, but like Anson Dorrance was a huge catalyst for even starting up women's soccer in the United States. And so, talk about culture change. I'm not just talking about a university soccer team. He actually, like, in some ways was a huge pioneer in the sport of women's soccer, and had to change a lot of culture surrounding that. And that book, man, again, a textbook. Like, I'm writing down like different stuff I can do based off of what I read in that book. And also another interesting format. So the book was written, and I'm failing on the name of the author. The book was written by a guy who spent 4 years with the UNC women's soccer team and observed them over the period of 4 years and wrote a book about his experiences. So it's not just like your normal biography. I mean, he went really deep into his research and wrote an excellent book. And again, not a short one, but oh man, it's really good, really great.
What I'll do is I'll try and find that book and the others, and I'll link them into the show notes of this episode so people can find them. It's a bit of a backward step really in the conversation, but I'm aware that you've lived in lots of places, in your journey to where you are today. How have you found navigating that aspect of life, being on the road a lot?
I love it. I had a friend of mine the other day was like, moving I'm so stressed or whatever. And I just said, like, I love moving. I think maybe at first I thought it was stressful, but that time of my life so long ago, I can't even remember. Like, I look forward to moving to new cities. I look forward to, I say, shedding my skin. Like, when I moved to Europe, I had to pack all my things in 3 suitcases. And so that means you get rid of a lot of junk. You get rid of a lot of stuff. You don't have like all this extra like noise in your life. And that's from a literal standpoint of like, you literally just get rid of clothing and things, but you also get rid of people, and you get rid of identities, and you get rid of communities that maybe weren't serving you. And so over time, it's like I've moved, I don't know, I stopped counting, but I always just say like 13 or 14 times in the past 10 years. And to different countries, to different situations, like, I mean, man, I've slept on floors, I've slept on air mattresses, the whole thing, couches. And I just think like I love it. It keeps my mind clear. It keeps my house clear of things. But that's a metaphor. My mind is clear. The conversations I have with people are clear, because over time, the people that have stuck around are the people that I really want to keep around, number one, and they really want to keep me around, number two. It's like, I moved to Amsterdam for a year. If you're not like a good friend of mine, we're not going to talk very much. So the people that have stuck around in many ways are like, it's like my closest, my most important possessions. The possessions that I've kept for the past 10 years, those are my most important possessions. And everything else just falls away. And you know what? I don't even remember the stuff that I got rid of. And I don't remember the people that I got rid of either. Like, I just let it fall away. So like, being a nomad to me is, I love it. I think it's almost natural. This has been talked about in several books that I've read. This is going down a rabbit hole, but what are podcasts for?
No, please do.
Yeah, this is going down a rabbit hole, but I've read about this in several books now. And the one that I'm thinking about is Sebastian Junger. I think it's called Tribe. And he talks about how, like, it's weird that we live in like these big houses and collect items. Like, it's strange. And that never used to be a thing. Like, I'm talking about like way back when we were hunter and gatherer societies. Like, you didn't bring a bunch of stuff with you when you were traveling all over. Like, these nomadic societies that went where the food was, they didn't bring a bunch of stuff with them. They brought their family and like some food and maybe, I don't know, a necklace that they made out of shells. Like, possessions, it's weird that we like hoard our possessions and keep all of these things that have, like, we put our emotional value into things and we keep them with us and travel around with them. And if we move our whole house, and we have, it's like, it's weird. It's not normal.
False sense of security.
Totally. And it makes you, when you live a nomadic lifestyle, which I don't know a lot of people out there who do, and it's common in sports, but I'm probably a person who has taken it to the extreme. But I just, like, when you live that lifestyle, it really keeps things simple. Like, if you've ever visited, it really hit me a few years ago. I guess it was only 2 years ago. I went to Laos. I spent 3 weeks in a village in Laos that's not even on Google Maps. And these people, as you can imagine, don't have a lot of worldly possessions. But the community was so strong and it was so peaceful because the disparity of wealth was like nothing. Everyone had the same thing. Pretty much everyone had the same house. Like, no one was, the crime isn't a thing because there's nothing to steal. Like, just everyone's job every day was to wake up. The kids went to school, of course, but like to wake up and live and spend time with your family. There was no like striving to make a lot of money so you can buy a bigger house and this American dream that we've created in our minds. Like, it just, the most simple living and the most peaceful environment and community I've ever been in. And I learned a lot from that. And it hit me like, no, this is no longer, I move around a lot because of sports and I don't have a lot of things. Like, no, this is a choice. I don't want a lot of things in my life. Things being possessions. I don't want a lot of things. I don't mind moving. I like it. I enjoy the clarity and peace that it brings to my life.
Where can kind of people track you and find out what you're up to?
I would say, I have a Twitter. I'm marginally active on there, but I'm on Instagram quite a bit, at Rachel.Balkovec. And then my website, you can reach out to me through email there, www.rachelbalkovec.com. Keep it simple. And then, I don't know. I know you had mentioned earlier, if people are interested, and this is also a passion of mine, is just like mentoring young professionals. I do have a website and a course for young professionals, resume and cover letter, and also just like career, I would say calling, finding your calling and understanding where your career might go. That's the virtualhandshakeacademy.com, and on Instagram at the Virtual Handshake Academy. And it's something that I'm extremely passionate about, is just helping people. Like I said, I feel like I have a calling, and like, I think everyone has a calling. but it's muted or it's subdued by societal values or people telling them they can't do it or whatever it is. And so I just love helping young professionals, young people in general, find that calling, and then also kind of getting them that first step towards, well, how do I do that? How do I get the internship? And so that's kind of molded into me starting a resume and cover letter service, but it also talks about networking, social media, finding your purpose and how to communicate that through professional materials. So that's how that came about. And again, that's the Virtual Handshake Academy. So that's another good place that I am, where you could find me.
And do you kind of mentor people through that service, or is it more you give them the tools, or both?
I have like some free videos and like free materials on there. But it's like really the benefit is, and there's a course, and I should also mention like 25% of the course fees go back to a scholarship that I'm starting. And so there's a course, there's materials, but if you actually do like a one-on-one consultation where I take you through your resume and cover letter, it's a mentorship. Like we have some deep conversations about where your life's headed, and like how to take the first step to get there. And that's what I really love. Like ultimately it's like, okay, resume, like it's creating a Word document, or whatever, and how to save that as a PDF. Like those are things that are actually in the course. But the more important part, of course, is like learning your purpose and your why as a young person getting into the career field that you want to be in. Why are you doing that? Taking a deep dive usually ends up taking a deep dive into like your upbringing and, what happened and what were the struggles that you went through, and how can you communicate those in a cover letter and set yourself apart and let people know that you're unique and you have a calling and it's not just applying for a job. So yeah, it turns into more of a mentorship than it is like, oh, here's a resume template. Like, yeah, that's there. But I just want to help people find their calling because I think it makes things so much more rich, and I don't want to say it makes them easier, but it makes hard decisions easier to make in your career when you feel like it's your purpose,
And is this service to kind of help people with any career, or is it geared towards strength and conditioning or certain sports professions, or kind of any of it?
It's any career, and I've mentored people who are like, I mentored someone who was like working for Chick-fil-A and wanted a manager job with Chick-fil-A, who was an awesome guy, by the way. But I would say it's like geared towards the course materials and just, it's my background, so it's geared towards more like sports and stuff. It's just a easier angle, but it's for anyone really.
Yeah, I guess a lot of people will probably stumble across it because of your involvement in sport.
Right.
But,
yeah.
Brilliant. Well, I think that's all we've got time for, but thank you so much for being so open and honest and transparent about your views and what you're up to. I think the listeners will agree. I could listen to you speak about life for a lot longer than we've got today. This podcast started about like research with eye tracking and ended on us being in villages in the middle of nowhere. I think this is a good podcast. Okay. Like you said, that's what podcasts are for, I think.
Exactly.
Well, thank you very much for coming on. I really appreciate it.
Absolutely. Thank you too.
Thank you, Rachel.